Hey everyone, welcome back to Tallulah Talks. It is actually Saturday today, which means it is time for Saturday's Haunting Hour. So today was requested, I'm not sure who it was by, I think it might have been the Celtic Druid again. So today we're going to focus on the Enfield haunting or the Enfield poltergeist. So you might have heard of this story, and that is because the makers of The Conjuring did the second installment of the franchise based on this Enfield haunting. So if you don't know, in the movie there's this family in England, and I think what had happened was her daughters had been playing with like a Ouija board, and it brought something into the house, and all this stuff started happening. They got their neighbours involved, they had to stay with their neighbours numerous times. And the Warrens end up being called over, and in the movie the Warrens are very heavily involved. It's not like that in real life, but they end up getting rid of the demonic entity, and you know, that's that. In the movie we do see that Janet does, the main little girl who this is all centered around, we do see that she kind of fakes some instances because the demonic entity had threatened to hurt her family. However, in real life, it is believed that the children faked some instances, but not everything. So it's quite controversial. But it is very different to the movie. There was no demonic entity. It was just simply a spirit named Bill. Oh, I can't remember his last name, but his first name's Bill anyway. And he is the poltergeist haunting the family. And the Warrens actually weren't all that involved very much. I think they came for a few days and that was it. But they weren't much more involved than that. So let's just get started. So our story begins in 1977 and is mainly centered around the Hodgson family, particularly Janet. The family consisted of the two daughters, Janet and Margaret, and the sons, Johnny and Billy, and mother, Peggy. Their father wasn't involved in this story. So the family lived in like an average semi-detached council house in Enfield. At the time, there was nothing kind of weird about it. You wouldn't think that any paranormal activity had happened there. It was just your ordinary council house. The first event is disputed as to what actually happened because there's conflicting stories, but it is believed to be either that the beds moved of their own accord or that the chest of drawers were moving back and forth. Either way, it was one of these instances that had happened. I think this was late at night, and Peggy had kind of said to the children to stop messing around, and she actually came into the bedroom and like to get them into trouble, and it was at this point that she saw she had moved the drawers back into place, and she saw the chest of drawers move of their own accord. At this time she did become quite scared, and she ran to her neighbour's house with the children. The neighbours then went back to Peggy's house to see what was going on. And they said that they heard unexplained noises from like an unexplained source. They couldn't find the source of the noises. It was like knocks and banging. And it was said to come from various places within the house, not just one place. It was at this point that the police were called because they maybe thought someone had broken in, so it was best to call the police. At this point, the Enfield haunting then became known like worldwide and internationally, and it is because much of the activity that happened in the house was actually caught on camera. And once the police had been called, more events took place. Items were thrown, and Janet was known to speak in very strange voices, known to be the voice of Bill, who had previously died in the home. It was also said that Janet was thrown around the room at various points, and there are pictures that shows her in weird positions in midair, but again, these are disputed. The family was then visited by members of the Society of Physical Research, and these were Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon. Both men believed the haunting to be very genuine, and there were also two professors involved who's come from like a local college or local university, and they claimed that the children had actually faked this activity. However, Peggy and actually the police witnessed this as well, and the neighbours had witnessed everything that was going on in the house that the kids couldn't possibly have done. This then attracted a lot of media attention, and it actually also ended up the case being turned into a documentary and various books. Aside from the knocking and banging around the house, there were reportedly demonic voices that would be heard by the family, toys being thrown around, and one instance of the children levitating. Gross and his colleague Guy reported whistling and barking coming from Janet, which they saw as very, very odd behaviour. Much of their equipment that they had used in the investigation, like the equipment was fine and working well before entering the home. However, when they entered the home, the equipment began to malfunction just for unexplained reasons. Janet was also found to have like a hidden recorder at this point, so it was like she was kind of faking the voices and not really making them. And she had been proven to bend spoons on another occasion, and that's why a lot of people think that the case is fake. But according to the family and other witnesses, not everything was faked. It is believed that much of the activity surrounding this home and this family was genuine, and it is also believed by some other experts that Janet had exaggerated some of the events, just looking for that little bit of attention. An example of this was that one of the scientists had said that Bill, a previous owner of the home, had similar vocal tics and habits that Janet had when he was speaking through her. This included like changing the topic of conversation when Bill would often speak through Janet. So Janet did do an interview years later when she was an adult, and she described, like before this all happened, she described herself as outgoing and loving sports, and described her family as pretty normal. The family had no knowledge of the history of the house, and the activity actually would begin in the back bedroom of the house. There were many instances involving Janet specifically, and one instance included curtains being wrapped around her neck, nearly choking her. The activity did get worse as time moved on, and the family would continually hear noises at night, and they then began fearing whatever entity was haunting them, and it was said that this then made the entity stronger. When the police were investigating, they did actually witness some of this activity, one of which was a chair shooting forward and stopping right in front of the policewoman, and it shot forward roughly about a metre. And they did check for wires, they checked for like magnets and stuff, and they couldn't find any explanations, and no one was near this chair, it just kind of moved. The neighbour who had helped out Janet also called the newspaper, and a man at the news desk was sceptical. However, he did still want to do some investigation. When it was mentioned to him that the police had witnessed this activity, this was then good enough for the media to come and investigate a bit more. When the media then witnessed like Janet coming into the room, that is when things started to happen around the home. They stated that the children couldn't have done what they had seen. They saw chairs tip, and chairs would also fly across the room, and it is impossible for the children to have done that at the time. Janet also describes being pulled from her bed numerous times and felt a cold hand and the feeling of being pushed into the air, which is what some of the photos were of her being in the air and levitating. The media people in the home could hear Janet being pulled out of her bed. And they also looked at photos showing the activity surrounding Janet. So like her being in the air, seemingly that she wasn't able to do this herself. At this time, like I said, psychology research were involved, and that was gross, and he did have personal experiences with the entity. There was an incident where the spirit spoke through Janet, and her mouth wasn't moving at this point, and there were a lot of witnesses to also say this. But he also tested, just to make sure that this wasn't a hoax, he made Janet hold water in her mouth, and again, the voice spoke through her pretty clearly. The team then wanted to, the team then went, to the graveyard where Bill Wilkins was buried, and there was no way that the family would have known about the previous owner, or how he died, or whether he died in the house. There was no way they could have known that. It was the 70s. They didn't have internet back then. And it was at this point that Ed and Lorraine Warren got involved for a short time. And it is said that when the couple arrived, Janet felt immediately at ease and comfortable. Lorraine stated that she felt the entity wasn't always good. It wasn't demonic, but it wasn't a good spirit. Janet and Margaret would show the media crew and the Warrens where in the back room where the activity started. And the children did say they all remembered the couple very fondly and thanked them for attempting to help the family. However, I don't think they could help all that much. Like I said, a lot of people believe this story to be a hoax, with the children, being behind all the activities. However, the mum, Peggy, did defend her children and told on how she had also witnessed all these events. There were many investigators who believe that the story begins and ends with Janet, because again, it did centre mainly around Janet. And much of the media wrote really scathing stories about her and believed her to be lying. But again, she was only 11 years old at the time. She may have exaggerated some of the events, but like I said, there were police who were witnesses, neighbours who had witnessed what was going on. And even when the kids weren't there were still things going on around that house. It was at this point, again, that the Warrens had got involved, and they found Bill speaking through Janet quite interesting. And some research actually suggests that Janet got the idea of using a strange voice from Gross. She told the media that Gross had told her that the voices or the entities within the home needed to speak, and so she maybe felt compelled to do that. However, the question was raised on how Janet could have known Bill, could have known how he died, where he was buried, what his first and last name was. There was no way she could have known that. Janet knew that Bill had died of a hemorrhage in a specific armchair in the living room, and this was then later confirmed by his son. Excuse me. And this then gave the impression that not all of the activity was faked by the children. However, after 18 months of activity, it just abruptly stopped, and no one knew why. But this is actually known to be quite common with poltergeists especially. They will haunt a family for, a number of months or a number of years, which we actually saw with the story that inspired the Poltergeist movie, where the activity just suddenly stopped after, I think it was like 8 months or so. So this is quite common and known to happen. During this time, like I said, there were many occurrences that had happened surrounding the children, where the furniture would move, the electric would malfunction, Janet would said to be pulled from her bed and pushed into the air, etc. So there were many instances that happened in that house. Janet did spoke with various voices, and banging could be heard around the home. Even when all the kids were in one room, the banging was going on, where it couldn't have possibly been the kids. It is still unknown whether the entire thing was a hoax, but knowing about Bill, that cannot be explained. And that is the case of the Hodgson family and their poltergeist. So I'd love to know your guys' thoughts. Like, do you think the whole thing was a hoax? Do you think part of it was a hoax? For me, I think most of what the children said was true, especially with all the various witnesses and the police checking for wires. And although Janet may have faked some instances, I don't believe she faked the whole thing because she was only 11 years old at the time. But yeah, what do you guys think? Let me know. And if this is the kind of content you enjoy, definitely hit that subscribe button. And if you have any cases for me to investigate, put them in the comments below. And I will be here on Wednesday for Killer Wednesday.